absolutely the most frightening thing that can happen to a scientist, which is why I was talking with some friends at the Aphantasia network, and I was like, oh, I think we got this all wrong. What Adam Zeman did, Adam Zeman is a neurologist based in the UK, who is the one of the authors that coined the term, that created the term aphantasia. And this term came about in the literature 12 years ago, 2015, 11 years ago, 2015, more or less. And that has completely revolutionized the field. So kudos to Adam Zeman to really being able to find a condition that kind of was already present in the literature here and there, right? From time to time, there were cases, even from Sartre and, over 100 years ago, people talking about these individuals that reported not being able to imagine, but who knows what that is. So kudos to Adam Zeman for coming up with this term, which has kind of really challenged many of our views of what it takes to imagine. So first of all,
Yes.
let's say that aphantasia is this condition, non-clinical, meaning that is not in any manual of the diseases, for which people report the subjective feeling of inability to imagine something. So when prompted to imagine, for example, a cherry and a strawberry and decide which one is more red, they report having no phenomenology, no subjective experience of those images being projected into this mental space, like many of us do, despite being able to answer the question correctly. So this is absolutely the most frightening thing that can happen to a scientist, which is why I was talking with some friends at the Aphantasia network, and I was like, oh, I think we got this all wrong. And I'll tell you why. It is very frightening because it shows us what we call a dissociation between subjective feeling of something, I'm experiencing a mental image, and objective performance. I am able to answer your question, right? And that was absolutely revolutionary and changed the field dramatically. So let's clarify what I mean by aphantasia once again. So these people say that they, when prompted to perform our classical visual mental imagery tasks, rotate this object by 90 degrees and tell me if it looks more like an A, letter A, or letter V, or letter E, or letter C, and so on, right? They are able to perform these tasks fairly well. Their accuracy is comparable to individuals that report having projected into the mental space and rotated the object into their mind. But they say, I didn't see anything. And that's where kind of Zeman really cut through the field. It's like, hey, these people can do our mental imagery task. What's going on? And then we started investigating, okay, so how did you do it? Wait, it shouldn't be possible. Something that Chris Schultz has recently called the visualizer fallacy. We, visualizers, meaning people, researchers that are typical imagers, were suspecting or expecting that you needed visual mental imagery to perform these tasks. But aphantasics told us, or atypical imagers told us, that's not true. And when you ask them, wait, how did you perform the task? They come about with the most interesting answers. They say, for example, often they look at us like with a little bit of confusion and curiosity, and they shrug and say, like, I just know. And that answers some of your questions. So what's the difference between typical imagers and atypical imagers or aphantasics? First of all, is that seems like, now I'm giving you my opinion, seems like the semantic system, the system that holds and stores knowledge and meaning in the brain, is preserved. in individuals with aphantasia. So they just know that a cherry is usually darker in red than a strawberry. So they will just use knowledge, right? So that's the first answer. Visualizer's fallacy. Why were we expecting individual with aphantasia not to know things anymore, right? So that was the first knife, right? They were slashing a lot of literature. So that's the
Yes.
first part. Individual with aphantasia still have knowledge of things. And then when colleagues, brilliant colleagues like Rishan, Reader, and so on, started following up to those questions, like, okay, what do you mean that you know the answer? They actually found out that individuals with aphantasia have developed or use different strategies to answer those questions. So rather than projecting their stimuli onto this imagined space to compare a cherry and a strawberry, they may use tactile information or auditory information or visual spatial abilities to answer those same tasks. And that was like, oh, wow, we are in trouble. We really are in trouble here, because that opened a Pandora box of like, hey, how do we study, how, how do we study this thing now?
Right.
How do we study what is the right answer to ask a person? What is the strategy they used to perform our task? And that's why I'm so excited. And everyone is so excited to be in this area right now, because it completely threw away many books. I'm not saying that, but it's kind of forces us to challenge some of the assumptions that we had before, and to
Yes.
think creatively about how to go by answering this question.
Yes. I love that answer. And I find it so, so fascinating at the moment. So my sister discovered at the age of 31 that she has full aphantasia. And she only discovered it because she was editing another podcast we had done on aphantasia. So literally while she was about to put the apple test like on the screen with the, like which of these apples do you visualize? She was putting that on the screen to edit because we were talking about that. I was speaking to Dr. Russell Hurlbert, and she was like, why not? I'll just do this. I'll close my eyes, which apple will I see? And she was like, it's black on black. And she just called me right away on the phone and was like, this apple test thing that you were talking about, like, you don't actually see an apple, right? I mean, there's no apple there. It's kind of just metaphorical, or like you kind of know there's an apple there. And I'm like, no, I see the apple. I absolutely see the apple. I can put a shine on the top. Like I can really clearly see it. And she was like, oh my God, I think I have aphantasia. And there's been so
Fantastic,
many.
amazing.
It's amazing. It's so interesting, and it's part of the reason that I'm so fascinated in this. But there's so many of these examples that have come up. Like she just recently moved into a new house, and we were talking about how she was going to decorate it. And she was like, I know what it's going to look like. And I was like, how do you know that? Like, how do you how do you know what the house is going to look like? And she was like, I don't know, but I know that the tiles above the kitchen are going to be emerald green. I know it's going to be, and she just detail by detail described exactly how the house was going to look, which was completely different to, how it looked at the time. And I was like, I don't understand how your brain is doing this if you can't see it. Because first off, I can see it, but I don't have like the taste that she has in terms of decorating that
Okay,
style,
yeah, for sure.
right? But I just don't know what that question means, or what does that sentence mean when she says, I see the house, I perfectly see it, I know it's going to look great, but she's not seeing it. That information is ingrained in the brain somehow, but just not in images, or maybe in images. I know Adam Zeman sort of maybe has this idea of unconscious imagery that I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Like, how do
Right.
you think, or do you think we know how that information is being encoded in the brain when they're doing these problems in ways that are so different to the way visualizers do them?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't know where I stand really in this area. I think that meaning do aphantasics experience mental images, but they're not conscious of them. So it's a problem of metacognition, meaning the image is there, just don't feel it. But I'm using the image to answer the question, which is like unconscious mental imagery is there, but it's unconscious. or is it a lack of metacognitive functions, or what? I don't know where I stand yet. I haven't seen interesting or convincing findings yet, meaning that we need in science, for evidence to accumulate to really adjudicate, or think or decide what part, what is most convincing. But let me pause back 1 second. So I'll get to your question 1 second. But listen what you just said. If you think about what you just said, it's funny that what you did is what we visualizers do. We tell someone that is telling it, I know how this room will look like. I know, but we can't stop ourselves and refrain from saying, yes, but you need to visualize the room
Right.
to see where the furniture is. And the answer, and they already gave us a sufficient answer. I know. That's it. I know, which is it is interesting to see how, for us, we are so used to this. Going back to the first answer I gave you, to this system being hijacked, knowledge going and calling visual information, that it comes out so natural to us that the two things are conflated. But the answer is, I know. So that's it. I know the answer to the question. The countertop will be emerald green. So that should be enough. But for us, it's not, which is exactly what led us to this point in science, which is not a mistake, quote unquote. We're not in a wrong place. We're in a very exciting moment, right? Of the study of visual mental imagery and aphantasia. Let me tell you, relatedly, since you mentioned this part of architecture digest kind of furniture situation, there is a
Yeah.
very important case published initially in 2020 from the group of Randy Starfelt, who folks can find it, our audience can find it. You just need to type on Google, the architect who lost the ability to imagine. An architect about 50 years old-ish, who, after unfortunate brain lesion, which is always something very unfortunate and has lasting consequences, lost the ability to imagine. And what he reported was, wait a minute, before the lesion, I was a professional architect and I was able to visualize entire buildings and spaces because that was my job without a computer. Now I rely on a screen to perform that same function, right? I need a external surface to project the visual image on by displaying it to do the same function, right? So that tells us again that we are used to use imagination for all sorts of daily tasks, right? Which is why it's so surprising for us when someone doesn't have a imagination or has aphantasia. It's why it's so surprising for us to be like, wait, how do you do it? How do you park your car? How,
Yes.
how do you, if your car is this size and the parking spot is that size, does it fit? And what trajectory do you need to follow? Wait, how did you do all that? You know, these are interesting questions. So the case of the architect tells us another piece of the puzzle, which is some people have congenital aphantasia or neurodevelopmental aphantasia, like your sister. She just grew up until 31, and she will continue her development just with this new label. Again, non-clinical. This is not a clinical condition. We don't need to put it into any manual, right? Any statistical and diagnostic manual. People live their best lives anyway. But some people have acquired aphantasia, meaning due to brain lesions to certain parts of the brains, they acquire aphantasia. And that's similar phenomenology, but it's a different case. And again, that's another piece of this gigantic puzzle that started, right? So you can acquire aphantasia after a brain lesion, and that will have very impactful consequences in your daily life. Before we move on, I'm going to tell you another example that really, my brain just exploded. I recently about a year ago, I met with this painter who has aphantasia. He paints. His name is Eric Anderson, and he has aphantasia. And of course, the fallacy of the visualizer that Alfredo would have said, okay, you shouldn't be able to paint. I mean, you can paint, but what are you painting? And this guy gave me again an interesting answer, which is like, okay, Eric, come here. What do you do when you paint? And again, aphantasics look at us, typical imagers, with the strangest of the looks, like really telling us this is the wrong answer, right? It's a wrong question. You're
Yeah.
asking a question that doesn't make sense. And he looked at me a little bit like, okay, boring question, but fine, Alfredo, he'll answer. And he said, Alfredo, I just get the paint and I put it on the canvas. And if I don't like it, I take it away. I was like, oh gosh, okay, now we gotta start from scratch.
Yeah.
Because that's a great strategy. Of course, like the architect, well, you just rely on the visual presence of the object to do tasks, but you don't care that other people can imagine them. And like your sister, she went by her life without knowing that she didn't have this ability. Like, I'm not good at singing. I mean, I'm okay with not being good at singing, right? Or many other functions, right? Or math. So just a way of being neurodiverse with some areas of competence, right? And that's what I think is going on. So that somehow also answered your initial question, right? Of what is going on in aphantasics and what do we do with these cases, right? And unconscious mental images. Who
Yes.
knows? Who knows if they're experiencing them? We'll certainly need to find creative ways to really pinpoint whether um, there is some trace of visual activation that just doesn't become a phenomenological experience, subjective. I have the apple in my mind, or there's no image at all and everything is already replaced by alternative strategies, right? That's what we're
Yes.
going to do for the next 20 or 30 years.
The Giant Shoulder mission is to explore radical ideas in biology, neuroscience, and consciousness and elevate those stories to the highest possible level while keeping them accessible to everyone. If this interests you and you want to support independent science, then please consider subscribing to the Clips channel